walked through the door at 11:15 on a Tuesday night, and the first thing he did was look at me like I had done something wrong. I was sitting in the kitchen with a cup of chamomile tea that had gone cold. I hadn't been sleeping well for weeks. I heard his key in the lock, heard the familiar sound of his boots on the mat by the door, and I felt my stomach tighten the way it always does now when he comes home. Not the way it used to, not the way it did in the beginning, when I would actually get up and meet him in the hallway. "You didn't call," he said. "Not hello, not how are you, just that." I looked at him. He was still wearing his coat. He had a look on his face that I recognized. Tight jaw, eyes a little too hard. The look that meant he had been rehearsing this conversation in his head the whole drive home. "I did call," I said. He set his bag down on the counter with more force than it needed. "I didn't get anything." "I know," I said, "because a woman picked up." The kitchen went very quiet. I want to tell this story the way it actually happened, not the way I've been replaying it in my head for the past 3 weeks, smoothed over and edited into something that makes more sense. The truth is messier than that. The truth is, I had been half convincing myself I misheard her, that maybe it was his colleague, that maybe there was a perfectly normal explanation and I was the kind of person who jumps to conclusions and ruins good things. My husband and I had been married for 5 years. We met in Ottawa at a friend's birthday party at a bar on Elgin Street. He was from Hamilton originally, came to Ottawa for work, project management for a federal contractor. I was 28 and working as a dental hygienist, and I thought he was the most interesting person I had spoken to in years. He had this way of paying full attention to you when you talked. Full eye contact, no phone, no looking past your shoulder. At the time, I took that as a sign of good character. I understand now that it can also be a skill. We dated for 2 years before we got engaged. Nothing rushed, nothing that looked wrong from the outside. He was attentive, he was steady, he made decent money, he got along with my mother, and he remembered small things. The name of my childhood cat, that I hated cilantro, that I always wanted a window seat on planes. I told my best friend that I felt lucky. I think I actually believed it. We got married on a Saturday in September at a small venue outside of Carleton Place. 40 guests, peonies. A DJ who played too much early 2000s pop, and not enough Fleetwood Mac. My father cried during the toast. My mother-in-law sat in the front row with a smile that I could not fully read even then, and that I understand much better now. The first year was fine. The second year was also fine, with some friction. He worked long hours, I had a commute. We argued about money in the quiet way that married people do, not screaming, but pointed, nothing alarming, nothing that I would have flagged as a warning sign. It was around year 3 that he started traveling more. Quarterly trips to Toronto, he said, for client meetings. Sometimes a long weekend, sometimes a full week. I didn't love it, but I didn't question it either. We had a joint account and the spending always looked right. Hotels, meals, parking, the kinds of charges that correspond to what someone says they're doing. I looked. I'm not proud of the fact that I checked, but I did, and everything was there. Everything was in order. I want you to understand that I am not a naive person. I have a full-time job. I have a mortgage. I grew up watching my mother navigate a difficult marriage with clear eyes, and I swore when I was young that I would not let myself be fooled, that I would always pay attention. I paid attention. I just didn't know what I was looking at. The trip in February was supposed to be 4 days. Client meetings in Toronto, dinner with the project team, the usual. He left on a Sunday afternoon, and I drove him to the Queensway to catch a bus because he didn't want to pay airport parking. I watched him go. I went home and cleaned the bathroom and made soup from scratch and called my mother and went to bed at 9:30. On the Wednesday, I tried to reach him. We usually texted through the day, nothing elaborate, just the small check-ins that couples do. "Did you eat? Bus is late. I found your gym card in the dryer," that kind of thing. That Wednesday, he had been quiet since morning and I didn't think too much of it, but by 7 in the evening, I wanted to hear his voice, so I called. It rang twice. A woman picked up. She said, "Hello?" I said, "Hi, I'm looking for my husband." There was a pause. A small one, maybe 2 seconds. And then she said, in a voice that was very level, "I'm sorry, who is this?" I told her my name. Another pause. "He can't come to the phone right now," she said. "Can I take a message?" I asked her who she was. She said she was his partner. I asked what she meant by that. She said, "We've been together for 4 years. We have a daughter. She's 2. I was standing in my kitchen in Ottawa in wool socks with the overhead light too bright, and I didn't say anything for what felt like a very long time. I heard, faintly, through the phone, the sound of a child, a small voice saying something that wasn't quite words yet. I hung up. I didn't call back. I didn't text him. I put the phone face down on the counter and I stood there until the soup I'd left on the burner started to smell like it was catching, and I turned off the stove. And then I sat down on the kitchen floor with my back against the cabinet and I stayed there for a while. I want to be honest about what I felt in those first hours. It wasn't rage, not right away. It was something more like disorientation. Like the floor had tilted and I was trying to find my footing. I kept thinking about small things. The way he always said he was a private person. The way he never wanted to do video calls when he was traveling. The fact that he had a second phone that he said was for work and which I had never really questioned. I pulled these details out one by one and looked at them and they all looked different now. I did not sleep that night. The next morning, I called in sick to work, which I almost never do. I made coffee and I sat at my kitchen table with a notepad and I wrote down everything I could remember. Every trip, every discrepancy that I had smoothed over, every time I had noticed something small and chosen to let it go. I was not doing this to torture myself. I was doing it because I needed to understand the actual shape of what had happened. And then I called a lawyer. Her office was on Bank Street. I had found her name through the Law Society of Ontario's referral service. She had reviewed family law cases for 20 years, and she had a voice on the phone that was calm and specific and exactly what I needed. I explained the situation. She asked clear questions. She told me what I would need to document. She told me about what I was entitled to, the matrimonial home, the division of assets, spousal support, the pension he had been contributing to for 7 years before we married, and the portion of it that accrued during our marriage. She was not dramatic about any of it. She was practical, and practical was what I needed. I did not tell my husband that I had called her. He came home on the Saturday 3 days later than planned. He walked through the door at 11:15 and he said, "You didn't call." He was angry. He had been carrying that anger for days, apparently, the version of events where he was the injured party, where I had been cold and distant, where my silence was the problem. He had convinced himself of this so completely that he led with it. He came into his own house and opened with an accusation. And I said, "I did call." A woman picked up. He didn't deny it. I had thought, in my harder moments over those days, that he would deny it, that there would be shouting, that he would construct some explanation, but he stood in our kitchen in his coat and he just went still. He looked at me and I watched him calculate, and then he sat down at the table and he said, "I can explain." "I know you can," I said. "I'd like you to tell me the truth." What came out over the next 2 hours was this. He had met her in Toronto about 4.5 years ago during one of his early work trips. She was a project coordinator with one of the subcontractors. It had started the way he described it. It just happened, which is a thing people say when they don't want to take responsibility for a series of deliberate choices. She had gotten pregnant. He had not ended things. He had, instead, continued both lives in parallel, funding her apartment in Scarborough through a personal account I didn't know about, spending enough time there that their daughter knew who he was. I listened to all of it. I didn't cry. I took notes, actually, on the same notepad I'd been using all week. He seemed unsettled by that. I think he had expected tears or screaming or something he could manage. Notes were not what he'd prepared for. When he was finished, I said, "Is she aware that you're married?" He said yes, she had known from close to the beginning. I said, "Does your mother know?" That one landed differently. He looked at the table. She does, he said. And that, I will be honest, was the part that actually broke something in me, not the affair itself. Not even the child. Though I cannot describe to you what it felt like to understand that there was a 2-year-old girl in Scarborough who had my husband's eyes and had been alive for 2 years while I was here making soup from scratch and cleaning the bathroom and believing we were building something together. That was devastating in its own way. But his mother who sat in the front row at our wedding with that smile I couldn't read, that was a different kind of wound. I asked him to sleep in the spare room that night. He said he thought we should talk more. I told him we would, but not tonight. He went. I called my best friend at midnight and spoke to her for 2 hours. She drove from Canada to sit with me the next morning. She brought Tim Hortons and she did not tell me what to do, which was exactly right. She just sat with me while I figured out what I thought. Over the following 2 weeks, several things happened. My husband wanted couples counseling. He said what he had done was wrong, but that he loved me, that we could work through it. He cried, actually cried, which I had never seen in 5 years of marriage. He said he had been afraid to end things because of the child, that he hadn't wanted to be an absent father, that he had made one terrible decision and then been paralyzed by it. I understood the logic, I did not trust it. My mother-in-law called me on a Thursday evening. She said she had always hoped I would never find out, which I found to be a remarkable thing to say. She said that her son was a good person who had made a mistake. She said that a marriage was worth fighting for. She said, and this is the part I keep coming back to, that ending the marriage wouldn't undo what had happened and that I should think about what I wanted my life to look like at 45. I thought about it. I thought about it for a long time. What I kept returning to was this. I had spent 5 years married to a person who maintained an entirely separate life 2 hours away, who had a child with another woman, who chose, at every point where he could have told me the truth, to not tell me the truth, who let me build a life on a foundation that he had hollowed out from underneath, and then came home after 2 weeks of silence and opened with an accusation. I thought about what it would mean to stay. The counseling, the rebuilding, the long work of trusting someone who had demonstrated over years that he was capable of extraordinary deception. I thought about what it would mean to look at him across a dinner table and know what I knew. To wonder always. To monitor always. To carry the weight of what his mother had told me she knew and had kept from me. I called my lawyer again on the following Monday. We had a straightforward case, she said. The matrimonial home was in both our names. We had no children together. The asset division would be clean. Given the circumstances, the process would be as uncomplicated as these things can be. I had already taken photographs of every financial document in the house, tax returns, investment statements, the mortgage papers, the insurance policies. I had already transferred my direct deposit to my own account at Tangerine, separate from our joint account at RBC. I had already quietly made an inventory of which things in the house were mine before we married and which were ours. Not because anyone told me to do these things, because I had spent a week sitting with the reality of what my life actually was, and I had decided that whatever came next, I was going to be prepared for it. When I told my husband that I had retained a lawyer, he went quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "So you've already decided?" I said, "I decided when you came home and your first words to me were an accusation." I moved out of the house 6 weeks later. I stayed with my parents in their place in Bearhaven for the first month. My father made eggs every morning without being asked, which was a kindness I didn't know how much I needed. I found a one-bedroom apartment in the Glebe in the spring, on a street with old maples that were just starting to come in. I signed the lease on my own. I paid first and last with money from my own account. The divorce was finalized 8 months after that first conversation in the kitchen. I kept my half of the equity from the house sale. My lawyer was thorough, and I did not leave the table underprepared. There are things I think about still. I think about the little girl in Scarborough who is not my concern and not my responsibility, but who is also, in some real way, a person who did not choose any of this. I think about what her life looks like. I think about my mother-in-law and her careful, knowing smile. And I wonder whether she believed she was protecting her son or just protecting the version of the story she could live with. I think about the woman who answered the phone that Wednesday night. I've thought about that call many times, what it must have been like on her end, her partner's wife suddenly on the line, whether she was scared, whether she was relieved, whether she already knew it was only a matter of time before that call came. I don't have answers. I don't think I need them. What I know is this: I called. He didn't answer, and the silence he left behind told me everything. The maples outside my new apartment went orange in October and yellow in November, and by December they were bare. I made soup from scratch one evening in February, exactly a year after the phone call, and I stood in my own kitchen in my own wool socks under my own overhead light, and I felt, for the first time in a long time, like the floor was level again. I had paid attention. I just hadn't known for a while what I was looking at. Now I do. I keep thinking about that Wednesday night. Wool socks on a cold floor, soup catching on the burner, a phone face down on the counter. It wasn't the dramatic confrontation people might expect from a story like this. There was no screaming. There was just a woman on the other end of the line with a level voice and a silence that told me everything I had been choosing not to see. I've thought a lot about cause and effect since then, not in any mystical way, just in the plain, ordinary sense that choices accumulate. My husband made choices for 4.5 years, small ones and large ones, each one building on the last. He chose not to tell me. He chose to keep a second account. He chose to let his mother know and ask her to keep quiet. He chose to walk through our door after 2 weeks of silence and open with an accusation. None of that happened by accident. It was the compound result of who he had decided to be, one decision at a time. And I made choices too. I checked the joint account and told myself everything looked fine. I noticed the second phone and accepted the work explanation. I felt sometimes that something was slightly off, and I smoothed it over because I wanted the version of my life that I believed I had. That's not self-blame, it's just honest. We both lived inside the story we preferred until the story became impossible to hold. What I learned from all of it is quieter than I expected. I used to think that the people who survive hard things are the ones who feel the least, who go cold, or numb, or righteous. But that wasn't what got me through. What got me through was something closer to clarity, the willingness to sit with what was actually true instead of what I wished were true. To look at the shape of what my life actually was, write it down on a notepad, and call a lawyer in the morning. That kind of clear-eyed honesty with yourself is harder than it sounds. It requires you to give up the comfortable version, and that's not nothing. It also required me to trust my own judgment again after years of quietly doubting it. That's the part nobody talks about. When you've been living inside someone else's deception, you start to wonder if your instincts are broken. They're not. They were right the whole time. The work is learning to listen to them without immediately talking yourself out of what you heard. And then there's the part that comes after. The one-bedroom apartment in the glebe. The signed lease. The first and last from my own account. That part asked something different of me. Not intelligence, not moral clarity, but just the willingness to keep going on a Tuesday when I didn't feel like it, to make soup again, to let the maples outside go bare and wait for spring. Steadiness isn't glamorous. It doesn't make for a satisfying moment in a story, but it's what actually moves a life forward. My father made eggs every morning without being asked. My best friend drove from Kanata and didn't tell me what to do. The people who showed up for me did it simply and without drama, and that mattered more than I can properly say. I paid attention the whole time. I just didn't know what I was looking at. Now I do, and that knowledge, the kind you earn the hard way, doesn't leave.